Hello and welcome to my assessment. Okay, so first we're going to be addressing how to find each angle's degrees, radians, and coordinates. So we're starting off here. This would be 0 degrees, and if you go all the way around the circle, it is 360 degrees. Next we have half of that, which is here, half of the circle, makes it 180 degrees, because 360 divided by 2 is 180. So next we have a fourth of the circle. 360 over 4 is 90 degrees. And then 3/4 of 360 is 270. Okay, so then they're going up 90 degrees each time. Next we have half of that, so this is our 45 degree angle. This right here is our 30 degrees, and this is our 60 degrees. So, in between these two, you add 30, so this would be 120, and then following the pattern, in between these two is plus 15, so this would be 135, and then you're adding 15, so 150, and then adding 30 to get to the fourth. So that makes sense. So 180 plus 30 is 210. 210 plus 15 is 225. 225 plus 15 is 240. That's plus 30. And then again, plus 30, 300. Plus 15, 315. Can't really see the 1. And then you add 15, 330. Add 30, 360, so that means that you made it. Okay, so those are your degrees. Next we're moving into the radians, and that's a little bit more difficult. So first you're going to start at 0. So these are your degrees. I'm just gonna try to separate that. Okay, so right here you start at 0 or 2 pi. 0 or 2 pi radians, because a full circle is 2 pi. So half of that would be pi. So a fourth, or halfway to pi would be pi over 2. So you have 0 pi over 2, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, so this would be 3 pi over 2. Okay, so those are your first 4 radians. So now just looking at the first, or this quadrant, you have 30 degrees. So I like to figure this one out by looking at 30 out of pi. So 30 out of 180 is 1/6, so that'd be 1/6 of pi. So it's just pi over 6. So then you would count, so 1 pi over 6, the next 30 degrees would be 2 pi over 6, which simplifies to pi over 3. And then we have 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, simplifies to 2 pi over 3. And then we have 5 pi over 6, which is simplified there. 6 pi over 6 is pi. 7 pi over 6. 8 pi over 6 simplifies to 4 pi over 3. 9 pi over 6, which simplifies to 3 pi over 2. 10 pi over 6 simplifies to 5 pi over 3. And then 11 pi over 6, which is just 11 pi over 6. Oops. So those are your 30 degree radians. So now we have 45 degrees. So 45 divided by 180 is pi over 4. So, or it's 1/4 of 180. So that means it would be 1/4 of pi, which is pi over 4. 2 pi over 4 is pi over 2. And then the next one would be 3 pi over 4. Next is 4 pi over 4, which is just pi. And then we have 5 pi over 4. So that's simplified. 6 pi over 4 is simplified to 3 pi over 2. And then we have 7 pi over 4, which is simplified. Okay, so now we have all of our radians, all good. Now we're going to do the coordinates. So we know that the distance from here to here of this radian is 1. So you go over 1 to get here, so 1, and then you're not going up at all, so this would just be 0. So here, you're not going over any, so the x-coordinate is 0, and you go up the distance of the radian, which is 1, and then we are going left 1, which is -1. You're not going up, so it's just 0. And then we have, well, you're not going over any, you're going down -1. Alright, so now you have your first 4 coordinates. So a way to remember, I just do this one chunk at a time. So we have these 3 to figure out. So I start off by remembering that each numerator is a square root of something over 2. So I write that in. Square root of something over 2. Square root of something over 2. So we don't know what's inside of there yet. I don't know what this is. Okay, so the way that you taught me that I remember is you go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you just write in 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So that's it. And then you can simplify square root of 1 over 2 here and here to just 1 over 2 because the square root of 1 is 1. So then there you have it, your first 3 coordinates. So now the way I like to look at it, instead of rewriting each time and figuring it out, you can just remember that this is x, y, because it's positive, positive. This is negative, positive, so negative x, y. This, to get to this quadrant, you'd have to go negative, negative, so I'm just going to write that here, negative x, negative y. And then lastly, you have positive x, negative y. So this is helpful because when you look at the coordinates, you can just write the exact same thing, but instead of positive, positive, it's negative, positive. So this will make more sense if I just show you. So we got this one is corresponding with this one. So that would be a negative x, so you would change it to negative half, and then positive square root of 3 over 2. And that's it. So then these two correspond, so you change it to negative square root of 2 over 2, and then square root of 2 over 2. Okay, and then these two correspond, so you have negative square root of 3 over 2, and then just half. So you already have this quadrant, so that's kind of nice. Next we're going into this quadrant right here. So these two correspond, and they're both negative, so you don't have to worry too much about which one is. So since these two are corresponding, it would be negative square root of 3 over 2, and then negative half. Then your 45 degrees corresponds, so this one. So you have negative square root of 2 over 2, and then square root of 2 over 2. Lastly, you have this one, so negative half, and then this would be negative square root of 3 over 2. Alright, now you're just moving on to your last one. So these two correspond, but now your your y is negative. So these two being the same, you would have positive square root of 3 over 2, and then negative half. Your 45 degrees correspond, so square root of 2 over 2, and then negative square root of 2 over 2. Lastly, you have this one that corresponds, so half, and then negative square root of 3 over 2. So now you have all of your coordinates filled in. I'm just going to move it around so you can see it. So yeah, that's it. So next, we're going into how to find sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So I'm using 30 degrees as my example. So first you're going to start off by looking at your unit circle. So we have sine of 30 degrees. So sine is the same thing as the y coordinate, and cosine is the same thing as the x coordinate. And then tangent is the same thing as y over x, or sine over cosine. So you go to 30 degrees on your unit circle, and you go to the y-coordinate, which is half. So that means that that's pretty much it. So your sine of 30 is just half, or 0.5. Next, you have the cosine of 30 degrees. So go to 30 degrees. So the x-coordinate would be your cosine. So this would be square root of 3 over 2. So next you have your tangent, and you can't find this on your unit circle, but what you do is you do sine over cosine. So 1/2 divided by square root of 3 over 2. So that's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So you do times 2 over square root of 3. Alright, so these would cancel, 1 and 1, so you would be left with 1 over square root of 3. Now you can't have that on the bottom, so you want to multiply by the square root of 3. And then you have square root of 3 over 3. And that's your answer. Okay, so next you have your cosecant of 30 degrees. So cosecant is just the reciprocal of sine. So the reciprocal of half is 2. Secant, the reciprocal of square root of 3 over 2 is 2 over square root of 3. That's a red flag because you can't have a square root at the bottom, so you write in the margins just 2 over square root of 3. You multiply by your denominator equals. So then that would be 2 square root of 3. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is just 3. Next you have your cotangent. So square root of 3 over 3, its reciprocal is 3 over square root of 3. You have to do the same thing. So you would do 3 over square root of 3 times square root of 3 over square root of 3. So then you have 3 square root of 3 over 3. Lots of 3's. So those are your 6 trigonometric functions. That's how you find it and everything. I always like to check it on my calculator just to make sure it's correct. So make sure that it is in degrees. So you're just going to do sine 30. So we got half, which is correct. Then we're going to do cosine 30. So we have this fraction, so now we're just going to check by doing square root of 3 divided by 2, see if it's the same. And it's not. Oh, I wrote it wrong. Okay. So square root of 3, like that. And they're the same, so that's correct. Next we're doing tan of 30. And then you check by doing square root of 3 divided by 3, and they're the same. So you can check the others, but knowing that these 3 are correct, you can just trust your math and, flip them and multiply if there's a square root at the bottom. So that is how I find degrees, radians, coordinates, and these trigonometric functions. Okay, thank you.